is.
And I'm guessing it's actually slightly more significant than that. Without doing the number, does that include,
Benefits.
no, does that include power purchase?
No.
The number you're calculating?
I just went off our total electric expenses, not including our CIP.
No, power purchase. The amount of money that we pay to NPPD, it's almost like a pass-through.
Gotcha.
So just in your general O&M items, because we're paying the piper no matter what with NPPD. We
Right.
bought power, we gotta get it from somewhere. And so it's significant. I don't wanna demean this thing. I think it's incredibly important that we make this step. But I also don't
No,
wanna
it
not, I don't wanna give it say it's 1.6% and then not give you the reality that the mass majority of your O&M budget is buying power from
No, you're right.
NPPD. But I still think this is definitely the direction we need to go.
And we don't, I don't have an issue with the $10, just, that was, the 5 was just a placeholder, cause we, just like with your burn permit, we needed to have a number to put in there, and we fully expected you all to discuss and decide what makes the most sense. So I don't want you to think because we put 5 that we oppose anything higher. We just needed a placeholder, and I think if you wanna be competitive, then you need to be competitive and be a number at or higher than who you're losing people to. It's not like a boogeyman argument where we might lose people to this imaginary entity, and this is happening in real time. So this is the time, if you want to address this issue, to get out in front of it the best we can, even though I say being proactive, we are kind of being reactive right now, but our hope is that that turns into being proactive if we can be a little bit more aggressive with the pay line, and go from there. But I'm not gonna pretend like, don't be surprised if the communities and the entities around us are also having these same conversations when they go into their budget cycle, and we may be back here again, in a couple months saying, now all of a sudden we're in the middle again, or something, so we do keep monitoring, that array as well as some of these other entities, so I do think it makes sense.
We have to start somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other one is, again, if we made this request, I would not put a number on that sheet. I know that $10 is matching us or getting us close to LES. I would not put a number on there if me and Nick didn't feel, in looking at the numbers, that we can work with Larry in the conservative nature of the way we budget the electric department so that we don't go over budget. When you're considering power purchase and how large this budget for electric is, I feel confident working with Larry and Nick, or whoever's Nick's replacement is, in keeping electric under budget on the O&M side to make sure this can be accommodated for whatever your will is.
Even at $10.
Even at 10.
Okay.
I would not,
Yeah.
if we did 10, I would come here and say, hey, we're gonna go over budget. We're going over.
That'd be a different
You
conversation.
tell us, you tell us.
Yeah.
Before you, we'll try to not
There's a
extend
reason
it.
why your
Before
spreadsheet doesn't go to 20, right?
Yes,
Is what you're saying.
because it could. You
Yeah.
could go to infinity, but
So with that, does that $10, like I said, we kind of see this as a double-edged sword, is retaining but also recruiting. Would that $10 put us into a position to where we could recruit better at this point?
anything would. We can't, obviously, we're gonna have an opening potentially at the exact same time,
Right.
unless they don't go. But we're gonna have an opening at the same time as LES. So until they fill in, we're gonna play this game for a little bit.
Right.
But I think what you're talking about in the direction you're giving, Councilmember Miller, of looking at that time to move through the process and some of these other benefits and bring those things back as well.
Right.
I think those are all things that are achievable that we can continue to do in the short order here over the next month or so, and bring more of those things too.
Right, and that kind of goes to what we're looking at for, LES, they don't have a window, it's a set hourly minimum, maximum. Norris is the same way, they're so small of a window to where, like we're talking about, if we would bring somebody in, you're at a 4-year to get them up to speed. So we need to have that wider range of a window on there, it's just how do we get that structured to where that would
We
be-
talked to Larry and Jared about what that would look like and how, in the evaluation process, you have to be upfront, whether it's maybe the job description, and we put it in there, where it's gonna be, hey, you gotta take your merchants courses, you gotta do the work, you gotta do the on-site work. If you don't pass, you're not moving. That's what happens in LES. You don't pass your merchants course, you're not moving on to the next step, you're staying where you're at. And maybe we just be a little bit more tight, constrained about that, but say, if you do the work and get yourself spun up, we'll we'll get you spun up too and match what's out there in the market. But you have to do the work.
Rich?
What makes a lot of sense to me is that I now have a better grip on the problem, and that is that it's not only retention, but it's recruitment at the same time.
Yeah.
We have to be competitive to draw in the best candidates so that we can keep our workforce strong, so I do understand. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments from the council? Yes.
I guess comment I'd like to make is, you know, you always think of how all the departments here seem like they really have a good culture of working together. So like Larry will reach out to Brandon's guys or Bob's guys, and they put their, right, you have your departmental meetings and they put their resources together, and they can utilize people from different departments to tackle some projects. But when you get to the safety aspect of what we're talking about, there's just nothing that can compare to having the 4 years of experience and knowing the equipment that they're working on. So like,
Well, it's a technical skill.
well, so Alan and Jared and Larry, when they're out there in the field, don't have to wonder, my God, did the guy actually do what he's been trained to do? So I think that's a huge issue here as far as, trying to use mutual aid with Norris, with LES, MPPD, whoever, because obviously our guys know everybody that works at Norris and stuff too, and they know what they have for equipment and, share resources too when they need to. So with that being said, I just think people need to, the taxpayer needs to, we need to go on record, the taxpayer needs to understand that we're trying to utilize the taxpayers' money the best we can to get as much done as possible.
And
But there's just certain things that you can't do
Yeah.
if you're not trained. The other point I wanted to make is the pain that Alan and Jerry and Larry have of spending all this time and having this revolving door. I think the professor ought to get a little kick from the tuition dollars of, I don't know what you wanna call it, but there's obviously a pain that they, as loyal employees, that they feel putting all this time in, and then they wave as the guy goes down the road to Lincoln. And I think that needs to be part of this conversation going forward too, is how do we acknowledge that? And instead of, to use your analogy, Josh, with the farm team, maybe our managers and our coaches on our farm team need a little recognition, a little bump or whatever, acknowledgement that of what they're going through.
And
So-
and a lot of that is trying to avoid wage compression. And we ran into this also with the police department as well, because you want to make sure, and I always jokingly talk about, I call it the cable conundrum, which is, you've been with the cable company for 15 years and you're paying so much for your cable, and you see a commercial that says if you're a new subscriber, we're gonna give you all the extra channels that you don't get, and we're gonna charge you half as much for it, and you're like, wait, I've been with you for 15 years,
Right.
why is this new person getting this, this benefit? And so we try to make sure that not only do you want to attract the new people, so to speak, but you also want to show appreciation, to your point, to the people who've been with you this whole time.
Yeah, I think
as
that
well.
points to the morale issue that
Yeah.
they brought up and stuff. So I think we need to be cognizant of that and start working on a way to.
And I think this does talk about, if you wanted to go up 10, it's
We quantified it as 10 across the board for all of them.
Yeah.
Everybody, all the linemen and
Everything
everybody
moves up.
above them.
But
rising-
but
rising
again, it's a
tide.
bigger percentage for the rookie,
Yeah.
right? So you give everybody a 10, the guy that's been with you 30 years, it's not as big a percentage bump as if you were talking percentages instead of just dollar per hour.
And I'm not gonna try and speak for them, because I agree with you too, that we gotta take care of the ones that actually stick with us. But right now, what they're saying to us is, I don't wanna be on call every third week now, because we can't retain people. I want you to get the people here standing next to me and keep the good ones we have, so that I can do the things that Alan and Jared talk about, where they're like, I wanna go to my kids' stuff. I don't wanna be on call and not be able to go to Aurora or York and go see my kid play this week. And they do a good job of moving around and stuff. I think right now, they're like, just triage this, stop the bleeding, so that they're not the ones suffering. Because I don't know how much money is gonna buy them not being able to go do the things they wanna do because they're on call every other week.
Mhm.
I mean, that's really where we're at right now, and then we can continue to push through these other issues. But we're gonna try and do our best to be aggressive and we're showing you data and numbers and what's the actualities of going on. We're not trying to pull wool over. Since I've been here, this has almost been a constant. I've said it, nobody's walking out of the door because they're looking for a new set of skills, or they're going into a different career field out of the lineman. They're going directly into these other offices.
The next thing is, Josh, so how do we read this? I mean, we're gonna amend it,
Right,
and
so,
then just say that we'll increase across the board?
Well,
The scale has to jump, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But the bottom and the top of the scale all slid
Correct.
$5 for what we proposed to you.
Right.
So the increment was always the same.
Yeah.
Between them?
$5.
so you
So if
wanted
you
to-
slide them 10,
Yeah,
bottom and top, just slide them 10. And again, we're actually gonna see this thing compressed based on what Councilmember Miller's talked about. So I would not be terribly concerned about the length. Slide that, bring back something to start moving them through quickly, and based on their qualifications, realign them. But slide that wage
so
10.
but you're gonna come back with that part.
No, we'll just amend it because all we have to do is change the bottom and the
She's talking
top,
about the
add 10.
compression. She's talking about the compression.
Yeah, that will be a different one. That's
Okay.
gonna take a
Yeah.
little bit more
Finesse.
finesse for us because of the handbook, the job descriptions,
That's what I
the
thought, I was like,
qualifications.
what, we can
This
do
is
that?
triage, that's
So-
first thing you know.
So we're also not gonna languish on that. Like, our goal is, we wanted to have this
So
conversation
you'll
with
bring
you.
that back next time?
Yep,
Whoa.
have this,
Ish.
no guarantee.
Ish.
In the future.
There's a lot of work there. We have to make sure it kind of meets all the muster, but that's our intent. We wanted to give this to you. If your direction was, no, there's people out there somewhere $2 an hour, then we're not getting the sense that you're really, but you read the room here and where this is going, we're gonna try and push that dynamic.
Generally speaking, we're talking 10, so,
So Kelly, yeah, so your question is how do you word this?
Mhm.
So Kelly, would you like a motion to amend this ordinance draft to reflect, instead of $10 an hour? Is that sufficient?
okay.
Okay, and then we would introduce the ordinance as amended.
Okay.
Is that good?
Why don't we introduce it first, then make the motion to amend?
Okay, you wanna introduce for then, okay,
here, one thing,
yeah, Carl?
with that scale, do we have anybody at that bottom level that would move with that? Would it be possible to slide the top of the scale and then deal with the lower end at a later time? Not that it would make a difference other than. any
I
open-
would slide all of it 10, because as you heard, they're walking out of the door
Mhm.
getting 14 for where they are right now.
Right.
So if we slide it 10, they're getting 10 today.
Right.
Everyone. If you stretch it, they will not do that. Because they'll be elongated on the bottom end. They will not get 10 dollar for dollar, which may mean they get 7 or 7.5 if they're at step 3 or 4 or 5 or haven't moved up. I would just, for their brains and the way that this will ultimately work, my recommendation is a dollar for dollar slide.
In order for it to be applied, so we can't just say, everybody's gonna get $10, and we don't raise the bottom of the
Yes,
scale.
if you don't raise the
Based
bottom,
on
then
the
go, it's
scale,
not
that's
$10 for
the
everybody.
issue, yeah.
Yep, you have to slide both top and bottom $10. Every line in the middle moves $10 across all of them.
I'll already sort
Alright,
Okay.
1 second. You wanted me to read it first? Okay. Just making noise when it's time.
I'll let you.
An ordinance to provide for annual classification of officers and employees of the city of Seward, Nebraska, to provide for longevity pay and payment of part-time employees, to provide for a date such classification and pay ranges of compensation shall become effective, to provide for publication in pamphlet form, to provide for a time when this ordinance shall take effect. The ordinance has been read by title and is designated as ordinance number 2023-9, and the title is hereby approved. I need a motion to dispense with statutory rule.
So,
A motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I'd like to offer an amendment.
well, this
You wanna-
this is just a
Statutory
dispense with the
rules.
3 readings.
Sorry, we're still on the
Yeah,
statutory.
we're getting rid of the
rules.
3 readings. So we have a motion and a
Go
second.
on that first, right?
Yeah, one moment. We'll get right to it. Please register your votes. Rich, did you want to vote? All right, please display the vote.
I'm in.
Voting in favor,
President
Wilkin, Kaler, Tanya's, Coulterman, Miller, Singleton, Streisand, Morgan, 8-0.
Didn't think it was that controversial.
Statutory ruling, sorry.
This is ordinance number
No.
number 2023-9. Would anyone like to move that this ordinance be passed and adopted as read? Do you want to
Now
ask,
let's do the amendment.
would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion to amend the ordinance to change it from $5 as it's written to 10, and the entire scale moves.
Okay, now are we voting on the amendment or are we voting on the,
Just the amendment.
okay, is there,
And this is a motion for basically the electrical items, adding $10 to the minimum and max.
yes,
Yes.
For those 4
okay.
electrical positions, correct?
Yes.
Second.
Motion and a second, is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, you register your votes. Please display the votes.
Voting in favor, Wilkin, Kaler, Tanya's, Coulterman, Miller, Singleton, Streisand, Morgan, 8-0.
Now, would anyone like to move that this ordinance as amended be passed and adopted as read?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is, shall ordinance number 2023-9 be finally passed and adopted? Please register your votes. Please display the votes.
Voting in favor, Wilkin, Kaler, Tanya's, Coulterman, Miller, Singleton, Streisand, Morgan, 8-0.
This is the only ordinance this evening, so I need one final motion to make the ordinance a part of the permanent record.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Please register your votes. Please display the votes.
Voting in favor, Wilkin, Kaler, Tanya's, Coulterman, Miller, Singleton, Streisand, Morgan, 8-0.
All right, thank you. Item 7, update on the wastewater treatment plant, presentation by project engineer SEH Engineering. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hit the red power button.
Let me turn that back on too.
Not,
Did it turn on?
not yet.
Okay.
Did you? And break it. Push it out first and
I do. Want some? Back.
All right, yep, we're good.
We're good. Hi, my name's Colin Markuson. I'm a wastewater engineer and project manager at SEH. I'm the project manager on the wastewater treatment facility improvements project. Project is moving along nicely through design. We did meet with several people from the city staff in late February after completion of what we call final layouts, which is a 60% design. And the results of that meeting is we thought it might be a good time to update the council on where we're at with the project and project costs and all those kinds of things. So I don't have any council action for you tonight, so you can choose now whether you want to listen to a wastewater spiel or not. So project status. Just gonna go through, I guess, a little bit of where we've been and where we're at now. So we started this project back in 2022, spring of 2022, and developed a facility plan. Actually, there was already a partial facility plan developed by another firm. We took that over, revised some recommendations, revised some costs, and finalized that in June of 2022. A facility plan, for those who aren't familiar, is really just a planning document. So it takes into account future growth in the city, not only from a population standpoint, but from also commercial and industrial growth. And then it tries to lay out alternatives to treat the wastewater from that growth over a 20-year planning period. So like I said, we completed that in June of 2022 and identified the most cost-effective alternative from the list that was laid out. We presented that, I wasn't here actually, but a colleague of mine presented that to the council and at a couple of different public meetings in town here. And it was submitted to NDEE for approval. We then moved into design phase, so preliminary layouts, which is also called 30% design, was completed in November of 2022. We've been meeting with the city now on a every other week basis to try to get input, answer questions from both of us as we go through the design process. Final layouts then, the 60% design was completed in February of 2023. We are working through development of construction drawings, which I would call 90% design documents, specifications and project drawings that we could use for bidding. We hope to have those done by the end of May. There's then a process where we would have to submit to the state for approval. And of course, the city would have to be on board. If we found funding and everything aligned, we could be ready to bid this project in the fall of 2023. Just to step back on the design a little bit, as laid out in the facility plan, the design does account for a bit of growth. So in the last several years, the population growth in the city of Seward has been around 1%. And we had discussions with city staff and decided together that that's what we'll account for in this 20-year planning period. We are thinking that the construction project will actually be underway or close to complete, or could be close to complete in 2025, so that's the beginning of our planning period. The end of our planning period, then that 20 years would be 2025. And we'd have a population based on that 1% growth of about 9,800. It also accounts for industrial growth, so 250 acres of industrial growth is what's anticipated in the next 20 years, and that correlates to about 344,000 gallons per day at increased loadings from industry. That table that you see at the bottom is really just another way to show the growth. So you can see the design year 2025, I'm sorry, the design year 2045 versus the current year. We're at about 790,000 gallons per day average daily flow right now. That's what ADF is. And our design accounts for a flow of more than double that. So it's a good amount of growth that we have worked into the design. The recommended alternative, or the most cost-effective alternative identified in the facility plan and the one that we're moving forward with, is called an SBR, Sequencing Batch Reactor. Just thought I'd take a moment to explain how that process works. So in many conventional aeration systems or types of systems that are used for wastewater treatment, there's several different tanks. So there'd be after the wastewater is screened and degraded, it goes into a biological process, typically in an aeration tank, and then into a quiescent zone called a clarifier, where sludge is able to settle out and clear water is more towards the top. This design, an SBR, does both of those processes in the same tank. So you can see there's several different phases, and you're treating the wastewater in batches. That's why it's called a sequencing batch reactor. So there's a fill sequence where the tank is literally filling with screened and degraded wastewater. Then the aeration turns on and it's treated biologically. After that, the air is turned off, the sludge is allowed to settle out, and then in the fourth phase, the draw-off phase, the clear water or the cleaner water is taken off the top and sent to disinfection. And then finally, some of the sludge is drawn off of the bottom of the tank. That's called waste sludge. Some of the sludge is kept in the tank to then be used for treatment, a biological treatment, keep the biology going in the tank to be used for the next batch. I talked about the design considering a good amount of growth, but we're also considering a few future stringent effluent limits. So Nebraska's not quite there yet, but in the state I'm from, Minnesota, and our neighbors in Wisconsin, and several states throughout the US already have pretty stringent phosphorus limits for sure. Nitrogen limits are just starting to be rolled out in Minnesota. The EPA is really trying to push that because of the dead zone in Gulf of Mexico. So phosphorus limits, believe it or not, are coming in Nebraska. So the nice thing about an SBR is that in order to treat for phosphorus and nitrogen, there's not a lot that has to change in the system from a capital standpoint in order to do that. It's really just an operational change. So we're planning for that as well. An SBR is efficient on expandability, so we have a system designed right now that has 2 SBRs. They share a common wall in between, and the third cell, which is also being designed, is for future capacity, but for now we're going to use it for aerobic digestion. So we do have that capacity in place if there's an industrial user or something like that that comes to town, or good for Seward, you have 10% population growth or something like that, we have that extra capacity built in that aerobic digester cell. Alright, so the aerial shows the existing facility site. The black lines are what is designed. So I'll just step through it really quickly. Flow still comes into, and I don't have a laser pointer or anything, so I apologize, guys, but
Should we get up, shake it up and like point,
You
see how
want to?
close I am?
I can.
You wanna come over.
Alright, yeah. We'll go.
I think I know it, I've done, sat in on enough
That'd be a
meetings.
good test for you. So flow still comes into the influent pump station, number 15. We are upgrading that building. It's an existing building, but we're upgrading the pumps in order to meet the capacity needs that we have for the facility. Flow from there is then pumped to 20, the operations building, where the full flow will be screened and degritted. So there's a vortex grit removal process. Grit is really just sand that's in the wastewater or large particles. Clean, somewhat clean wastewater goes from there to the SBR basin, where it goes through that process that we just talked about. So fill, aerate, settle, and then go to the next process. The next process from there, after it's been treated biologically, is to go to UV disinfection and then out to the Big Blue River. On the solid side, solids are taken off the bottom of that SBR, and then they're pumped back to the operations building, where the sludge is thickened. The reason for thickening sludge is so that your downstream tankage can then be smaller. So, you're taking out some of the liquid that would otherwise be there, and you'd have to account for that in your tank design. So, instead of making giant tanks, we're making only kind of giant tanks. So, that digester that we talked about before is going to be right there, so sludge will be pumped off the bottom of here to here, thickened, back into the digester, and then from there, after 60 days of digestion, after the sludge has been stabilized, then it goes through pumps in here, back up to number 70. It's a solids dewatering building, and it goes through a process where the sludge is dewatered, and it turns it into what's called a cake sludge, and that's similar to a damp topsoil. And again, the reason to do that is to save on storage capacity. Dewatered and treated sludge is then good to be hauled out to fields to be line applied. But you can't always do that all year round. Maybe farmers have a crop on it, maybe there's snow on the ground, so on and so forth. So in the interim, dewatered sludge is stored in this new cake sludge storage building. The city also wanted to add a garage, new garage facility, because their current garage space is now being repurposed. There are improvements being done to the administration building, building 90 as well. I think I hit on everything. We are are going to continue to use this, cake sludge drying bed.
Question.
Yeah.
So on your sludge, you know, in the winter months, so is there enough capacity, say, to get through 3 months?
Yes, so, good question. So this structure is designed for 6 months at the design year. So 20 years from now, you'll have 6 months of storage in there.
I'm just figuring winter month.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we plan for. Back to my slides. Alright, so here's the real reason to have a discussion tonight. Back when we developed the facility plan, we put a cost estimate together that was about 24.8 million. As we've seen with everything else, costs have obviously increased. So the latest cost estimate, and I should say that there has been some additions to the design or to the estimate with some additional buildings and those kinds of things, but where we're sitting right now is 38.8. So there are also opportunities for some savings, which we've already discussed with city staff and are not included in this 38.8 million. They have to do with operational changes that may allow us to, for instance, reduce the thickness on some of the slabs on the tanks. We have been cognizant of costs through this project. As you guys just talked about, there's been labor increases like crazy, inflation, supply chain issues, scarcity of resources. So I don't know if you heard about the cement shortage that happened this year. There's been a 30% increase on piping easily, especially PVC piping, 25% increase on cast-in-place structural concrete, and then anywhere from 15 to 40% increase on labor. I did talk with Steve McNulty, who's a funding specialist or financing specialist at NDEE. He administers the state revolving fund loans and grants. He said in the last year, they've bid 20 to 30 SRF projects, and they were 5 to 117% overrun on cost. So, I guess the takeaway is misery loves company, right? It's not just you that's in this, but costs have definitely increased.
So
And it is a concern on the project.
Question on that,
Yes.
so, is there a change order coming for the cost change?
No, so this project is only under design right now.
We're still in,
We're still only in design.
Okay.
So, we have had discussions with city staff, you know, about how this project may or may not move forward. I think right now, our plan is to have a design completed by the end of May, but it likely won't move forward until some funding is found, or, you know, maybe there's a different decision, that's made that drives the project forward, but, those are the discussions that we've had to this point.
Are you seeing any of the, have you seen any of the inputs coming down in price? That when we got to that point, you might see, I'm there, really, it's not gonna be like $15 million worth, but is it trending in that direction, or are the inputs still hovering at where they're currently priced?
Lumber, good question. Lumber has come down a little bit. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of lumber on the project, aside from,
Redesign it with lumber.
Better be green tree.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that it's coming down as much as starting to stabilize a little bit. Back to, let's say 5% inflation, or, you know, something like that.
So Larry, I have bad news about those raises we just approved. I'm kidding.
You should have left while he was ahead.
Alright,
solar,
so,
we'll do solar.
like I said, we have been doing due diligence on design. We're keeping track. We've got a running list of items that, you know, are wants for the project, and I think would add some efficiencies to operation and likely lower operating costs and those kinds of things, but from a capital standpoint, they're things that could be taken out if we needed to. We're keeping that list. I can't tell you the total on that right now, but I I think the big takeaway here is that there is going to be a significant impact to rates eventually, right? We just don't know what that is yet. The reason we don't know what that is because we don't know what kind of funding we're going to be able to get on this project. So our long-term goal, like yours is, I'm sure, is to minimize rate impacts. We are looking into all sorts of different funding sources. SEH, the company I work for, does have funding specialists who have been helping on this project a little bit. They just helped at the end of February with a congressionally directed spending application that got submitted. I worked with the city on that. Other things that we've been looking into, so USDA rural development. Well, the median household income is too high in Seward for grants. There is a possibility of a 40-year low interest loan. So, you know, if you run that loan term out, that's your best chance of reducing that loan payment, just like you would if you did a car loan at 7 years rather than 4. So.
What's the life cycle for something like this?
Yeah, good question. So.
About 40 years?
Well, so that's the problem. So the tankage for sure, 40, 50 years, I have no problem saying a concrete tank is gonna last that long. Especially with the structural engineers that I have on the team. Which is a joke, that inside joke that's going back and forth, but the problem is the mechanical equipment. So motors, pumps, things like that. 20-year life expectancy is about what we usually plan for. Sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's less. I think the idea is you're continually planning for that replacement though, so that you don't get into a situation that we're in right now in the future. Other potential sources of funding, so the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, or State Revolving Fund, doesn't have any money right now. They've made that abundantly clear to us, so that's unfortunate. I think in order to get money from them, we're at least a year out. Of course, the city could bond for the project. There's potential of economic development grants if an industry comes into town or something like that, and there's an opportunity that presents itself. There's the opportunity for some state congressional directed spending. And then, of course, we'll continue to monitor for other loan and grant funds as we move forward with the project here. But wanted to give you an update on where we're at with the project and especially where we're at with those costs. So I hate to, but I'll put that project or that slide back up so you can see where we're at. Questions that I can answer?
Make,
Yeah, go ahead.
I make comments while we wait for some questions.
Yeah.
So one of them is, question is, hey, right now, wastewater's going down the system, we're treating it, not a big issue. It will be soon, correct?
I thought we were up against our capacity.
We are, but for the most part, we're not in violation. We've said from the beginning that we're slightly ahead,
Right.
but Seward was growing at a rate that was faster than your plan. And so you had I believe a 20-year plan, and in year 5, we noticed that you would max out that plan in 10 years.
Right.
And that's when we began this process and started working through that. It's really being pushed by the residential side. That's, the residential growth is what kind of kept pushing it, and predominantly on the hydraulic volume, which is just the sheer massive volume, not the loading, not the stuff that's in it, it's just the volume of what was coming into the system.
Yeah, good question. So when we started looking at this project back in 2022, we found that you had about 10% capacity left in the system. We actually just revisited those numbers from a flow and loading standpoint and found that you're up against capacity. The other thing to note is that the plant so the last capacity expansion at the plant was 1978. So The other thing to note about that is you have a trickling filter plant right now, and the plant was originally designed to have essentially 2 treatment trains, so you run parallel flow, so half of it would go to one trickling filter, half of it would go to the other, meets in the middle, goes out to the river, you're all good. Well, flows and loads have gone up so much in the city over the past 50 years that you now need to treat in both of those in series. So now the redundancy that you had by having 2 tanks is no more. It has to flow through both tanks in order to get proper treatment before it goes to the river. So you're up against a dangerous situation where if one of those tanks were to fail, you know, the mechanism inside the tank fails, you have a media collapse inside the filter, you're gonna have trouble meeting effluent limits.
And what would happen then is that we would go into non-compliance on our permit,
Right.
and then we'd be forced by the state to design and build exactly what we're doing right now. Correct?
Right, no,
Yes.
And Brandon, I see Brandon shaking his head, Mike's back there. You guys correct me if I'm wrong, I sat in on enough of these design meetings on Zoom so many times that I feel like through sheer osmosis, I've absorbed something. But that's essentially what will happen. And then they will force us to do exactly what we're doing right now, is design a new facility. And we, from what we've already talked about with Colin, we're designing the most efficient, cost-effective facility. If we go out and try to build this because there's failure all over the place and we ruin the system, we go build a new green site, it's gonna be way more expensive than this, correct?
Correct.
Let alone the fact we also have to acquire a site and find one that actually works within the topography of the city of Seward. That's why this is the location this is in the first place, because it's probably the most efficient.
And we have space to build essentially a new treatment plant while the existing one is still running,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. You don't have that luxury on a lot of projects.
Can you remind me timeline on this for future, what were we looking at here?
As far as design?
For the whole thing?
Okay, so, design, we're hoping to have complete, by the end of May. So discussions with the city staff again at the end of May, go through everything, here are the updated project costs with everything included, 90% design. We would submit those design documents to the state, for review and approval. Their time frame for review and approval is an unknown for us. We're hopeful that it's 1 to 2 months. So that would put us into the end of July, August maybe. By the time we responded to their comments and got reapproval, we're likely into the fall of '23. By the time we were ready to actually bid the project. Then it would be up to the city as far as whether you want to move forward with the project or not. Once the project is bid, I'm gonna say it's at least a 2-year construction project, probably 2.5.
And we're up against the limit now on the clock.
Right, but as long as you have it planned
Right,
and you're
right.
moving forward, they just don't
The
want,
state is good with that.
yeah, they don't want you to be in non-compliance and then have no plan.
Right,
The one that's gonna hurt is it's gonna put a complete clamp down on your ability to grow. At some point, they will say, no more commercial industrial at all. And they may even say, depending on your level of non-compliance, no more residential growth either, until you solve this problem. I mean, that's how strict it can be.
it can be,
Yep.
but they've also had evidence of writing memorandums with understanding, as long as you were on track.
Yep.
To do this.
And we are on track. We've been
So-
in lockstep and hand with, DEE now, or whatever it is.
It's been what?
In the process of when we started this 4 years ago
Four
now.
years ago, 5 years ago.
So they've been aware of our situation and our capacities and where we'll get and where we were projecting out this entire time. And so, I think Jonathan, myself, and Mike were just on a pretty high-level executive director's level discussion with them about where we're at in our process and stuff, just recently even, so.
So the buildings there with them called like the dash, those are new
Those are
construction,
new,
right?
Yeah.
What happens to everything else? Is that like a redundancy, continue to use both?
So, We looked into how we could best repurpose some of those tanks. For most of them, it would have cost more money than it was really worth to actually do something with them. So they will be demoed as part of this project. So you'll essentially have additional space in the future, 20 years from now, you wanna expand again, there's your space to do it.
As the construction gets underway, the current wastewater plant is gonna continue to operate, isn't that correct?
Correct.
So I mean, so they're gonna be, the current system will do what it can do.
Yeah, there will have to be some sequencing and bypassing, so for instance, we're upgrading building 15,
Yeah.
building 70, those kinds of things, we'll have to kind of
Yeah.
bypass around those in the interim until the contractor's done with that work, but we can work around those things.
So then everything that we've done a few years back, cause we had the scare with methane. So everything we've done to that, is that going to be basically, there won't be any benefit for what we did?
Well, probably not, I guess, is the easiest way to answer that.
Because we went through,
So I don't-
what we're doing right now, we went through the same thing, it was a big scare for the city.
Sure.
And so we put a lot of money into the digester and that because of the methane scare.
Yeah, we looked into reusing the anaerobic digestion system. It's a big operating expense to use anaerobic digestion versus aerobic digestion. Safety is a big concern as well, obviously, so, we had those discussions with Tim at the time, and, the direction that we kind of landed on collectively was aerobic digestion, which doesn't produce the methane that an anaerobic digestion system does.
My other concern is we do all this, so we did all that work for the digester and we were basically on the chopping block then. So how long is it this before something else changes again and it's no longer at the level it should be? Because of technology and law changes and regulations.
Yeah, great point. We know what we know today. I wish I knew what was gonna happen with regulations, I think that's the big wild card, but, this design is really accounting for those regulatory changes, especially when it comes to phosphorus and nitrogen. The pumps and the equipment are all designed, and the tanks are all designed for that, growth that we talked about, so the 1% population growth and the 350 acres of industrial, so, if the industrial doesn't happen and the residential does, it all balances out.
Because the next thing that could happen is the state, EPA, DEQ, can say, hey, the solids no longer can go out to the fields. So you might have to make a change there.
I don't think they'll do that. I think what they'll do is they'll regulate what it looks like when it's applied to the field, so it has to be prescriptively applied and monitored and put into a nutrient management plan, but I don't know that they would just outright
Yeah,
stop it.
cause that'd be based on the nitrates.
That's what I'm saying, I
Yeah.
mean, that's what their movement is more along those lines, as opposed to just outright bans.
Right, I just, like I said, it's a concern because
Yeah.
like I said, we did all that upgrade and now we're gonna do another upgrade and there could be another changes down the road again.
Understand, and I can't speak specifically to the upgrades that were done, so, sorry, but, I would agree that, I think it would be quite a stretch for the EPA to all out ban land application. I think there'd be a lot of cities in your same situation.
Correct.
But to John's point, any changes in the regulations would likely have accrue additional costs.
Correct.
For sure.
To try to address those, to John's point.
That's correct, I mean, it happened with us, with the digester.
Right.
Exactly.
These upgrades that we're talking about are almost purely from a capacity standpoint. We're not reacting to regulations, or things like that, or non-compliance. We're reacting to the city's growing. We wanna continue growing and have room for industries and commercial and residential growth.
So my next question's gonna be, we just did all this changing from going from releasing into Plum Creek to the Blue River.
Yep.
Now, what's that gonna affect? I mean, are we still gonna be releasing, or is this going to change that process?
This will, so I was involved in that project as well, the effluent relocation. So that actually was a benefit to this plant because the ammonia limits at Big Blue River are higher than they were at Plum Creek.
Mhm.
So this, that pipe was designed for future capacity
Right.
when it was put in at the time. So this new plant will continue to utilize that effluent pipe.
Okay, I just was hoping that we did.
Yep.
So then, timeline, I assume this will all be part of the budget conversation and the budget process?
Yeah, but we have to really find some significant funding sources still, because this is gonna be a huge impact if we try to just eat 38,
I don't think you can eat $38 million.
so. It'll be part of the budget, I mean, again, being 2 years out, until we're at a point where we feel like we have a significant hold on the funding mechanisms, you know, deciphering some of these earmarks and some other things, and working our way through those projects. We're not gonna tee this thing up yet. It's just not safe for
Put
rates.
money in the wellness center.
I wanna make another point about funding as well. The other thing that concerns me is that some of these funding programs also require, or have some special requirements for American Iron and Steel, Build America Buy America.
Davis Bacon.
Davis Bacon wage rates. So, you know, that's gonna do nothing but drive costs up even more. So, those costs aren't reflected in that 38 million that we talked about because we don't know what funding we're going after yet.
The last thing we wanted to find out is that we got 4 million in an earmark and we increased it 5 million because of Davis Bacon, American Steel and everything else.
Right.
Your net was adding $1 million to the prod. It's just not, that's the level of fiscal analysis that's gonna need to be done on every grant and federal dollar and everything else we get. And again, probably our best source is still to try and work with the state, see if there's any possibilities to leverage for economic development or other purposes, to kind of hub Seward out in capacity and get this paid for. And so, but again, SEH and their staff and the fundraising side of it has been incredible, and we've had numerous meetings and discussions on Zoom to continue to send different programs and things their way to see what's available. So, but we won't bring this one up until we're sure that we got enough, because otherwise we're all paying for it and it's gonna be significant. So we're not ready to do that yet. We gotta go see what's out there and see if we can get some assistance. But we're seeing these numbers again, and I don't mean to speak for Councilmember Streisand, but these numbers reflect what we've seen with the wellness center and what we've seen in other buildings, even in the private sector, of what's going on right now. And
Is there any way when the cake storage structure is empty in the spring and fall, we can put treadmills and spin classes? Wait, I withdraw that. You don't want a jogging track?